Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lazy Road Talk. It's Saturday night. I've always wanted to bring some entertainment value to my weekend programs. I usually try to avoid strictly business topics, but I'm afraid I can't this week. Over the past few days, almost everyone has been talking about Trump's tariffs. They've caused a global shockwave. Financial markets reacted, and so did many governments. Some responded positively, others issued verbal warnings, and most are waiting to see what happens next. There's only one government that has issued actual retaliatory measures, and that is the Chinese Communist Party. Many experts have weigh in with their opinions, but no one is sure what will happen next in terms of the economic impact. One thing, however, is certain: this tariff war is a game changer. Now, as a China observer, I'm not here to comment on the economic numbers. Instead, I want to focus on the significance of this tariff war in the broader geopolitical landscape. It is no surprise the CCP is feeling the most heat. Trump's earlier anti-fentanyl tariffs and the anti-dumping tariffs on steel and aluminum were just warm-ups. This is the real deal, a full-scale trade war between the world's largest buyer and the world's largest producer. The United States has openly declared its intention to dethrone China as the world's factory. In response, China hopes to use this moment to spearhead an anti-US coalition under the banners of globalization and free trade. And we're just seeing the beginning. So today I'll break down the scale of this war and explain why China's economy is not able to sustain um, tariff war or trade war 2.0. I would like to call it a tariff war. So let me first start by saying on Wednesday, the US announced reciprocal tariffs on multiple countries, and it's 34% on China. Combined with the prior 20% tariff targeting fentanyl-related issues, the total tariff increase on China is 54%. Now, combined with the tariffs imposed during Trump's first term, which was kept by Biden, by conservative estimates, after this round of massive tariff hikes, the actual tariff rate on Chinese goods imported to US has risen to at least 65%. It could be higher. In addition, starting May 2nd, the US will eliminate the tariff exemption policy for small parcels coming from China and Hong Kong. This will have massive impact on China's commerce trade. Now, we've heard that $1 in $6 of imports from China comes in the form of small parcels. So that's significant. And if China continues purchasing oil from Venezuela, an addition of 25% tariff will be imposed. So when you add all of them up, this could push actual tariff rate up to 90 to 100% for Beijing. So this is a full-scale trade war, which is an extinction-level disaster for China's export sector and its economy. I'm going to spell this out for you. As China's economy suffers a traumatic downturn, China's economy is already in a traumatic downturn. Export is the only engine that's still alive and keeping the economy going. So export is extremely important to the stability of the regime. So now let me give you some numbers. In 2024, the US recorded a record high goods trade deficit of $1.2 trillion, while China posted a record high goods trade surplus of nearly $1 trillion. It's $992 billion. So both countries experienced record high trade surplus and record high trade deficit, depending on which side you're on. And according to Chinese customs data, China's trade surplus with the US was $361 billion. So you see, that's 36% of China's total trade surplus. So, in other words, 30% of China's total trade surplus was with the United States. And so this data shows you why the American market is irreplaceable for China. However, these figures are based on official data and do not include goods China rerouted through Southeast Asia, South America, and other regions. China's real trade surplus with the US is much bigger. I'll show them to you later. They're hidden in the trade surpluses with other countries. So in 2024, China's goods trade surplus with the EU was $247 billion. While the same year, the EU's trade surplus with the US was about 214 billion. So there, on one hand, the EU has a trade deficit of 247 billion with China. It has a trade surplus of 214 billion with the United States. China's trade surplus with Asian countries was $191 billion. And the Asian countries have a trade surplus with the US at 227 billion. So you see, so for both the EU and the Asian countries, their surplus with the US offset their trade deficit with China. So in other words, the EU and Asians' trade deficits with China are ultimately offset by their trade surpluses with the United States. So in short, as the world's largest importer, or as the world's largest exporter, China's real dependence on the US is much deeper than the bilateral trade numbers that we've seen. So let me give you one article, one research paper that was published by China's Orient Securities, a financial consulting firm. This was published in December last year. It discussed this subject in it was a microeconomic paper. And then the title was Indirect US-China Trade, Experience and New Trends. It pointed out that since 2018, while the US direct trade dependence on China has clearly declined, by 2024, the United States accounted for only 11.4% of China's total trade. I don't know, everyone's number varies. Some say 14%, but this article said 11%. But regardless, it is the lowest since China joined the WTO in 2001, according to this paper. So while this was happening, China strengthened its role in the global supply chain. So, and the article went on to say that through Southeast Asia, Latin America, and other regions, China has maintained complex economic ties with the US, helping preserve its export share and connections. And the report analyzed the activities in the following key areas. Mexico, it says China's direct exports to the US mainly grew. Oh, sorry, I missed a keyword. Regarding Mexico, it says China's indirect exports to the US mainly grew in construction materials, post-real estate development goods. I think it's probably home furnishing, interior decorations, and then textiles and transportation related consumer goods. And then for EU, it says some increase was seen in electronics and transportation equipment. Regarding India, it says growth focused on electronics and textiles. South Korea concentrated in transportation related equipment. And then it commented Japan, Canada, and South America, it says a little noticeable increase. So this explains why Trump's new comprehensive reciprocal tariff policy targets nearly all countries with close trade ties to China and the US to prevent China from bypassing tariffs through third countries. So now let's talk about Southeast Asian countries. Southeast and South Asian countries have become key transshipment points for Chinese exports. The US imposed relatively high reciprocal tariffs on these countries, especially those bordering China or have a close relations with China. So here's some numbers. And are you able to see? Should I make this bigger? Ah, this is probably better. Yeah. So, okay, so let's take a look at these numbers. I mean, Myanmar, Sri Lanka. I mean, these are all countries that either share a border with China, or have close relations with China. I think the U.S. imposed relatively higher reciprocal tariffs on countries that share a border with China. Even Kazakhstan, which shares a direct border with China, faces a 27% tariff. So Trump's higher reciprocal tariffs on China's neighboring countries aimed at blocking the CCP's dumping channels through them. These nations have not only become transit hubs for Chinese goods entering the US, but also these countries also assist the CCP to varying degrees in bypassing US technology sanctions, for instance, by helping China acquire urgently needed high-end chips. So the above-mentioned Chinese research paper didn't mention one country, and that's Vietnam. I find it to be very interesting. The omission, in my opinion, is intentional, because if you study Vietnam's trade with China and the United States, you'll see some problem. So now let's talk about Vietnam. I have a chart for you. Here's Vietnam. Vietnam in 2024, its GDP was approximately $476 billion. That's under $500 billion. Surprisingly, Vietnam's exports to US accounted for 28.6% of its GDP at $136.6 billion. While US exports to Vietnam were only at about 13 billion. So that is, Vietnam's export to the US was almost 30% of the country's GDP, and its import from the US is only 1/10 of its exports to the US. This led to a massive $124 billion trade deficit with the United States. Now, comparing this trade deficit to China's trade, I'm sorry, what I'm saying, it's not a trade deficit, it's a trade surplus, right? It's a trade deficit for the United States, but it's a trade surplus for Vietnam. So if you compare this to China's trade surplus with the US, Vietnam's trade surplus is 42% of that of China. But think about it, Vietnam's GDP is only what, 1/40th of China's GDP. So China's GDP, it's overstated. We know it's overstated, but still it's at least 10 times, 20 times. Officially it's 40 times bigger than Vietnam's GDP. So how could Vietnam have such a high trade surplus with the United States without having it contribute directly to its economy or GDP? In 2024, Vietnam exported about $61.2 billion worth of goods to China, down roughly $1 billion from 2023, while its imports from China grew 30%, surging to about $144 billion. So Vietnam's trade deficit with China widened from around $49.3 billion in 2023 to about 82.8 billion in 2024, a mind-boggling 68% increase year over year. Right? So you see, Vietnam's imports from China is almost the same as its export to the US. I highlighted the numbers in yellow. So this explains to us that Vietnam didn't produce it. It was a reroute. Vietnam was a transit stop in US-China trade. It exported the goods it imported from China to the United States. And this is the reason why its massive export to the United States didn't contribute to its GDP. The Chinese report probably want to hide this, and thus it didn't mention Vietnam in its research. Consequently, Trump's latest reciprocal tariff on Vietnam is 46%. That's also why the Vietnamese government immediately agreed, to have a talk with Washington. The Vietnamese has also agreed to lower the tariffs to 0, and the two countries' leaders have agreed to meet soon to discuss the matter. Now, I don't think Vietnamese zero tariff on American goods is material to the United States, right, in the scheme of things, because Vietnam doesn't buy that much American goods. But I think this at least started the conversation for the two countries' leaders to talk. I think the most important subject is, how to shut down China's trade rerouting business. But Vietnam is not alone. I want to show you some of the trade deficits with other Asian countries, but Vietnam definitely has the highest trade deficit. I mean, in this case, trade surplus with the United States. Now, China's trade surplus in 2024 was up 21% from the previous year. A substantial portion of this surplus came from the Asian countries, which Vietnam is part of. Asian countries were China's largest export destination in 2024. This increase was purely rerouting business, with the final destination being the United States. So you see, if we add in this piece, China's dependence on the US market for trade is greater than what it claims. Its official data suggests that China's total export to US is about 14%. I've seen some numbers saying 17%, because there are data discrepancies amongst various sources, Chinese sources. So officially, it's between 14 to 17%. But I've seen other China experts are saying that it's actually 25%. A quarter of China's export ended up in the US market through various rerouting. And the US contribution to China's trade surplus is also higher than the official 36%. It's probably somewhere between 45 to 50%. So that shows you the significance of the US, what US market means to the CCP. Now let's talk about European countries. Trump imposed a reciprocal tariff rate of 20% on the EU. Let's take a look at European countries' trade deficit and surplus with China and the US. In 2024, let me show you a chart, which took me some time to compile today. I must tell you, it wasn't easy. But here's a chart, what I came up with. The first column is, I show you European countries' trade surpluses with the US by country. Ireland leads all European countries in trade surplus with the US. This is probably because a lot of large American companies have subsidiaries in Ireland. And then the US has always had trade deficits with Germany, Italy, and France. I mean, these translate into their trade surpluses, right? So these are the numbers. At the same time, the EU also has trade deficits of approximately 330 billion with China. Now, the EU doesn't provide trade deficit or surplus data with China at a country level. It does not show the breakdown. So I was forced to look at the Chinese trade data. And then the CCP has yet to release the detailed trade data for Europe for 2024. So what I show you in the spreadsheet in the second column is the 2023 European country trade deficit or surplus with China. I know it's not an apple-to-apple comparison, but it's what I can gather at this point, and I think it's close enough just to illustrate my point. So among European countries, only Germany was able to achieve a trade balance with China. China exported about $101 billion worth of goods to Germany and imported about $106 billion from Germany. Other major European countries all had a trade deficit with China, and you could see in the column, in the 2023 column. The most outrageous case was the Netherlands. In 2023, it imported about $100 billion worth of goods from China and exported only about 17 billion. As for the United Kingdom, which has left the EU, it imported $78 billion from China and exported about 20 billion. So what I want to point out is most European countries have long maintained a trade deficit with China, but has a trade surplus with the United States. This means that the US has effectively been helping the EU offset its trade deficit with China. The United States has provided the safe net to Europe in balancing its trade, ultimately benefiting the CCP. Now, the United States' two neighbors are the same. Let me show you Canada and Mexico. Mexico enjoyed a trade surplus about $172 billion with the US in 2024, while suffered a deficit of 71 billion with China. So between the US and China, Mexico had a net trade surplus of a whopping $100 billion. Similarly, for Canada, it exported approximately $413 billion worth of goods to the US and imported $349 billion from the US, resulting in a trade surplus of $63 billion. Meanwhile, Canada ran a trade deficit with China at about 31 billion. So it has a net surplus of 32 billion between US, China, the world's largest market and the largest producer. So for now, the US has not imposed reciprocal tariffs on Canada or Mexico, although it had previously announced 25% tariffs related to their lack of actions on fentanyl and illegal immigration. So the United States has long had trade deficits, not just with China, but with most countries across the Americas, Europe, and Asia. The US new tariffs aim to fundamentally reverse this imbalance, blocking not only direct dumping by the CCP, but also transshipment dumping through third countries. The US also wants its neighbors and allies to recognize that the US will no longer help them cover their trade deficits with the CCP. All countries must work to confront the CCP and collectively block its dumping practices. This should become one of the main points on the agenda in the upcoming negotiations between the United States and its neighbors and allies. I think this is one of the most important highlights of this tariff war. The entire tariff war, from my perspective, aims at shutting down CCP's export dominance or export dumping and supply chain control. So now let's talk about CCP. Let's talk about why I think CCP cannot withstand a tariff war. Okay, so the Xinhua news agency immediately reported Trump's announcement of the reciprocal tariffs, but only listed US tariffs against other countries and deliberately avoided mentioning the 34% tariffs on China or the tariff increase on China. And then on April 4th, the CCP announced its retaliatory measures, right? 6 retaliatory measures. It only took them 2 days to respond in this case. It was rather brief, rather quick. And then stating that starting on April the 10th, it would impose the 34% tariff on all US imports. It also announced the suspension of imports from 6 US companies and added 11 American companies to its quote-unquote unreliable entity list and 16 American entities to an export control list. So it seems that the CCP has decided to seize the moment to start an anti-US tariff coalition under its leadership. It wants to be the leader of that anti-US tariff alliance. I just don't think how successful it will be because one, its economy cannot sustain such a fatal blow given the amount of tariff increase. And number two, I don't think the CCP will. Every country, when it comes to money matters, will be practical, and they know, right? They know the state of China's economy, and they can say all the politically correct things, but when it comes to money matters, I think leaders in democratic countries are not. I hope they're not. I don't want to use that word dumb, but anyways. So among all the countries hit by Trump's tariffs, China is getting hit the hardest. The average profit margin of Chinese exporters has always been very thin. It's a single digit. And often I was told that it's less than 5%. And they've relied on government tax rebate to really be to stay profitable. Now, if we assume both the importer and exporter split the cost of tariffs 50-50, China's export profits basically will be completely wiped out. They will lose money and they will entirely, they will lose money and they will entirely rely on government subsidy if they want to stay in business. And with a baseline 10% tariff already locked in place, even trying to reroute Chinese goods through other countries, even not the countries I mentioned, like Vietnam and Mexico, even China is trying to find some obscure small country somewhere, then there's a 10% baseline tariff. So that doesn't make much sense anymore because it's still not profitable. So at this point, China's export industry has only one option left. That is find replacement markets outside the United States. But think about it. Finding a replacement market for a full 25% of the Chinese exports, or even a good chunk of the 25%, that's almost impossible. The EU is the second largest market, but the Europeans are very cautious about Chinese dumping now. In addition, the United States would turn this into a fierce game of negotiation and diplomacy. So other countries will realize, that if they slam the door on Chinese goods, the US may open its doors wider to them. So I think China's export industry could face a total collapse. If the CCP's large-scale dumping can no longer continue, its cash flow will dry up. As China's economy continues to decline with no solutions in sight, the shock will spread across the entire economy. Job losses will be massive. Some estimated about 36 million people could lose their jobs. Meanwhile, the Chinese currency could face strong devaluation, right? Pressure to devaluate. Some say possibly falling to $1 to 7.8 yuan, or even 8.2 or even 8.5 yuan. Local governments, especially in export-heavy provinces, will see falling tax revenues and worsening debt crisis. Social stability would be challenged. Manufacturing cities could hollow out, leading to empty factories and more ghost towns. Social tensions will rise, especially among unemployed younger generations. And China will find it harder to access critical technologies like semiconductors and AI. A lot of the Asian countries have played a role in helping China obtain cutting edge semiconductors. So in short, the 54% tariff will likely trigger a negative cycle of shrinking exports, worsening employment, cash flow crisis, weakening consumption, contracting investment. This downward spiral will aggravate China's existing problems such as real estate crisis, local government debt, and high household debt. Now, due to the regime's authoritarian rule, the CCP has no flexibility or room to adjust or cushion against such waves of shocks. So when the last economic engine of China's economy is shut down, I think the regime will have to collapse. And I think this is the significance of this tariff war. This, from my perspective, this is significant, and we're only seeing the beginning of it. So sit tight. I think it will be very interesting ahead of us. That's all. That's all I have. Do I have all the? Yeah, I have shared with you all the slides. All right, let's see. I know it's a lot of numbers to go over on Saturday night, but I have to do it because this is the biggest event last week or this week. So hopefully this is helpful to you. I don't think a lot of people really covered the tariff war from this perspective, but I want to give it a try. All right, here's a super sticker from CWLPCO CWLPFOC. Thank you for your information. What country are you in? I'm in the United States. Thank you. Thank you for the donation. Let's see. All right, let's see. Is there another one? I saw another one. Oh, here's another YouTube channel. Thank you. Always enjoy your talks. Very unique and on point. Thank you. All right. I think is that all? That's all the super stickers? Okay. Oh, here's one. Another YouTube channel. Trump is a legend. Oh, I think he, I don't necessarily agree with him on the TikTok. I think he extended the TikTok deadline for another 75 days. And I think he's really trying to find a buyer to buy TikTok. I think the sooner he bans TikTok, the better. Because it is a spyware. It's collecting American data. And I don't think, and I think from the CCP's perspective, they're going to make this TikTok negotiation so difficult. They are going to make TikTok almost impossible to sell to the United States. So I don't know if it's a good idea to extend that for 75 days. All right. Oh, I want to tell you, I made a video in my other channel, Lay's Looking Glass. I was researching on White House feng shui because some of you suggested I do a video on White House feng shui, and I was researching into that. I came across a lot of information on feng shui and Donald Trump. So I made a video about Donald Trump and feng shui, and I think it's interesting. So it came out last Thursday. I forgot to mention it at my live stream Thursday night. So here I am telling you. Chris, can you provide the link to people? And so please check it out. Yeah, feng shui did help Donald Trump succeed in his real estate ventures. 20, 30 years ago. All right. That seems to be all. WTO is over. Splendid. No pain, no gain. Oh, I have someone here who's all right. In another YouTube channel, the American taxpayer is over it. Okay. All right. Let's see. Oh, here's a question forwarded by Chris. From Castle Helford. Hi, Miss Lei. Did you know the US produce wheat and soybeans for Southeast Asia and China realized on them to feed everyone? Realized on them to feed everyone. Yeah. China needs American soybeans for oil, for its oil and also the feed, animal feed, right? Because so the soybeans, yeah, it is yes, and then the U.S. produced I think the most cost-effective soybeans for China. They should buy from the Americans. Okay, all right, here we go. I love your hair. All right, good. Always a great show. Oh, thank you so much. I try. All right. Lazy prodigy. Oh, I love that. Do you believe China will go to war in order to dodge a collapse? Um, I think at this point, are you asking Xi Jinping? I think Xi Jinping probably had that thought. He may still have that thought occasionally, but at this point, if see, here's the thing: people have been debating. I have made programs talking about who is really in control. Is it Xi Jinping in control or the anti-Xi forces in control? Because the question is who has been in power, who has authorized the removal of so many of Xi Jinping's military leaders. So some people argue it's Xi Jinping himself because he is upset with them because of disloyalty. Now think about it. If Xi Jinping has removed so many of his own officers, do you think he's still do you think he's still thinking about launching a war to dodge a crisis? I don't think so. Right? So if Xi Jinping is in power, then all the removal of military leaders came from him. Then the question is, does he still feel confident enough to start a war to stay out of crisis? I don't think so. I think that logic doesn't fly. And then the other question, if it wasn't him who removed all the military leaders, it was somebody else, then the question is, will that somebody else or the other team, it was a team of 3 people, will those people be interested in starting a war? I don't think so. I don't think so either. Why would they? It's already messy enough for them, and why would they want to start another crisis? So in either case, it's highly unlikely. However, there are some low-level military officers who may want to start a war so that they have a chance to overthrow Xi. That's the intention. But can they start a war on their own? I don't think so. That's just my assessment. From Ruel Costello. Well, thank you, Ruel. Thank you. All right, here's from Wiselack. I read Japan will reroute goods through Vietnam as well. You mean Japan will reroute goods through Vietnam? I mean, to export to US? I don't think so. I think when Donald Trump meet with the Vietnamese leader, I think this will be the issue they talk about. Because, think about it. Vietnam's trade surplus with the US is 42% of that of China. I mean, how is Trump not going to talk with the Vietnamese leader about this issue? If he has so much issue with China, then Vietnam's trade surplus is 40, almost like half of China's. The problem is as bad because the country is much smaller than China. So I think the Trump administration will shut down that route permanently. If they're smart, they should. Okay. A vegan T-Rex. Thank you. Wow, people like this topic. I wasn't sure if I should do this. I think it's so boring to do a tariff talk on Saturday night, but I'm glad I did. Lazy prodigy. Thank you. That makes sense. The next 5 years will be interesting. Laughing out loud. Love the show. Well, thank you. Thank you. All right, let's see. Simon Robinson. I agree with the tariffs. A strong US is in our interest. At 10%, we should take advantage. But looking at high-tech manufacturing at home. Yeah, I think it's still premature to say that the United States will be successful in moving all the manufacturing back home, because I don't think we have the labor force trained and ready to go. I think it takes time. It takes time to build up the labor force for it. But at least it's in that direction. Okay, Netflix foreign. I think the Vietnamese talk they gave about Japan might be referring to some Japanese companies or production being moved to Vietnam to ship goods to the US and elsewhere. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, that's a different story. Yeah, the global supply chains have been moving out of China and moving them to Vietnam and India. That's a good thing. All right. Thank you for thank you for bringing that point. That's good. That's an excellent thing to do. All right, here's a question forwarded by Chris from Bob Hill. How will countries balance their books? They will need to tax their citizens. Inflation will raise all wages, making those wages more in line with US wages. How will countries balance their books? How do households balance their books? How do you and I balance our book? It's home economics 101, and it's no different from running a country, right? Confucius once said that running a country is like cooking a dish. He drew that analogy. You need the skills. You need the same skills to run the country as if you were cooking a dish. You know, you have to know your customer. You have to know what food you're making. You have to do all the preparation, and then you have to be passionate about it. You really have to enjoy, making a dish, right, and turn it into something that people want to eat. So I think that's a perfect analogy. And everyone can cook, but not everyone is a great chef. So the country's leaders, maybe we should all send them to cooking lessons. How's that? To have them learn Confucius teaching. Send them all to cooking class. I have a food competition, a cooking competition for them, for national leaders, to see who is a great chef and see how they come out. Wouldn't that be a good idea? I think a lot of them will fail. I think a lot of them will fail miserably. Anyways, good question. Now, another YouTube channel. I shouted you out to Randy Kirk, a Tesla YouTuber. Okay, I don't know who Randy Kirk is, but I've made programs talking about Tesla before. All right, let's see. Okay, here's a question from Richard Hinman. Lei, are you saying something labeled made in Vietnam could actually be made in China? Of course. Yeah. If you watch my analysis of that, it's absolutely a lot of the made in Vietnam stuff is actually made in China. Some of the made in Taiwan stuff. I mean, I was years ago, I was involved in some business with the Taiwanese. I mean, the Taiwanese businessmen were openly saying that, I mean, they were in pharmaceutical business. They can take ready-made drugs that are made in China and then get them into Taiwan and then repackage them and then put on the label made in Taiwan. So that's a common practice. Wick Lunda, do you think China's posturing about retaliation tariffs, they will back down when other countries agree to zero or lower tariffs? I think zeroing or lowering tariff isn't Trump's goal. The goal is really to uh, shut down the venues and channels for China to dominate the world's supply chain and also these various rerouting channels. I think that's the ultimate goal. Because if you really look at my analysis, the US has been helping every major economy to balance their trade deficit with China. If it weren't for the trade surplus with the United States, the EU, all these Asian countries, and Canada and Mexico will have a serious trade problem because they all have trade deficit with China, right? So ultimately, this is a trade war between the U.S. and China. One is the largest buyer, one is the largest producer. So it is a full-scale trade war. But the US is saying to other countries to say, I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to stop footing everyone's bill. Everyone needs to address the trade deficit with China because China is dumping cheap products on us. And it's not my problem. It's all of your problem. We need to all work on this. So that's, I think, his ultimate goal in this trade war. You know, so okay, all right, that's all. I think that's all. I reached the bottom of all questions. Sleeping LaFay, I love that name. Lay, clarifying timestamp when I show speed. The live streamer inside China was threatened by CCP minders. Which one? Which live stream is that? I have no idea. Which one? Was that one of my live streams? I don't think I did a live stream featuring a Chinese live streamer inside China. Please clarify. Here's a question from Bazad Lee. I'm not convinced by your population argument. Having done business in China for 20 years, now retired, I think the 800 million figure is realistic. I share your view. I'm not saying that I feel comfortable saying the 300 million, the 400 million. That's why I had previously said that China's population is not anywhere more than 900 million. But it is what it is. There are numbers that need to be presented. Maybe I'm a little ahead of time or I'm ahead of myself, but the numbers are what they are. And it doesn't matter if people believe in them or not. It's okay. I think it's just, I think we need to open our mind to see the world in different colors so that when we're actually confronted with the truth, we're not shocked to the point that we lose our rationality, right? Because oftentimes those people who are not prepared for changes are often shocked and be left with no time to prepare for the changes. But those people with the previsions, they're better prepared, they're better positioned to embrace what's upcoming. So all I'm doing is telling people the possibility of China's population. I'm not here to ask people to believe what I say. I'm asking people to open their mind to think that there's other possibilities. Okay, Lazy Prodigy subscribed. Well, thank you. Okay, I think that's all. Uh, I think that's all. I'll end it here. Okay, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Okay, bye. Oh, here's one more. How popular is Confucian teaching among the common Chinese today? Good question. I love that question. um, Conceptually, we know Confucius was a great teacher, a great thinker, a great philosopher. But when it comes to his actual teachings that people are taught in everyday life, it's reduced to almost nothing because traditional Chinese culture has been systematically destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. And what the Chinese government has revived in the past 30 years of economic reforms are only the superficial container, the physical, the hardware. Like they restored the temples, they restored the library, they built Confucius institution or institutes without telling you the true meaning of Confucius teaching. So that's deceiving, that's very deceptive. So when you ask me how popular is Confucius teaching, Chinese people believe that they know what Confucianism is all about, but I do not think they do. And I think Confucius values are well preserved in Taiwan and in other Chinese-speaking countries or communities. So yeah, so it is very sad. That's an excellent question. Thank you for bringing up. Wesley Bruce, there may be a big move from North China to South China. Videos of South and Central China cities, third tier, are still full. When you say a big move what, of people moving from the north to the south? Well, people, for the past 20 years during the economic reforms, the north has kind of become vacant because people have left the northeast region to the more prosperous coastal provinces and the south to look for better opportunities. There's really not much left in northeast China. That has happened in the past decades. It's not just recent. But have you seen I mean, I've seen videos showing empty villages and streets in the suburbs of Shanghai and Beijing. And that's shocking because Shanghai is the most populous city in China. And it used to be that everywhere you go, it's crowded. But now they have so many empty villages and streets in Shanghai and Beijing. And that's troubling. Okay, I have certainly reached the bottom of all questions. I thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you next week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye bye.